So for our fifth panel, we have the art of the interview. And we have our very own Lucas to moderate.
Lucas Skrobot, SK Robot, don't forget it. So welcome to the art of the interview. I have a question. I want to poll the audience before we start. Can we do that? Everyone practice with your hands. Do you have hands? Practice raising them. Just raise one up. Okay, good. So they do work. So when I ask, I know that I'm going to get a show of hands. So the thought behind this segment is that an interview is like a good therapy session, right? How many have experienced an interview where you feel like, wow, that was really touched my heart? But I'm always conflicted with the fact that conflict and drama sells, right? So I want to vote here and have a poll. Who thinks that a podcast, an interview, should be all kindness and joy and rainbows and just a nice soft therapy session? Raise your hand. Wait, not yet. And then the second group is going to be who thinks that you need to figure out how to weave in some drama and some conflict. So group one, it's all sunshine and rainbows. Raise your hand. Oh, I thought it was going to be opposite. Group two, who thinks you need to have that drama? Wow. That is opposite of what I thought. So this is going to be a fun time. So I want to welcome up first Alex, Atack from, oh, you're behind me. The one and only Kerning Cultures. Alex went to Falmouth University, See, it's like a vol. University in the UK. He worked as a photojournalist here in the UAE and in the UK for 4 years, shooting for people like the New York Times, the Guardian, and the Monocle. And then in 2018, he started working with Kerning Culture. Let's hear it for Alex. Second, we have Ashraf Faden, from the co-host of EishBTSWI and MyHeroicSelf from Jeddah. Came all the way. He is a sonographer by day and a podcaster by night, and he's also a professional photographer with amazing headshots. I was stalking his website the other day. Go check it out. He does great work. If you're in Jeddah and you need a headshot, he's your man. And last but not least, Turki Ali Albalushi min Muscat, Oman. MashaAllah, ya Rab. Ahlan wa sahlan. Let's give it up for Turki. He is a Omani journalist, media entrepreneur who he started an online newspaper, Albalad, and is the first online newspaper in Oman. And he also is a correspondent with Bloomberg and the founder of Al-Sekka, a podcasting platform producing high-end Arabic podcasts. So let's give it up for Turki and all of our panelists today. Guys, grab mics. Pick up your weapons. I think the batteries are close to dead, though. How are we? We can share. Oh, yeah, we got one.
Yeah.
So the first question is actually to you, Alex. When preparing for an interview, I'm interested to know how much work you put in on the front end to find the story and develop the story, to find the questions, and not just how much work, but what kind of work do you find to be most helpful when you're actually conducting that interview?
So I'm going to talk about, I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to assume we've already got our guests and there's a ton of work that goes into finding the people that we interview, but I'm going to skip that because I feel like it's more important to the prep that you do after you've found the people. So if it's someone that's done media before, obviously there's an amount of research you can do online and in previous interviews that they've done. Mostly though, with our stories, it's people that haven't done anything like that before. So what we do, and I think this is pretty standard in journalism, is we do a 15-minute, what we call pre-interview before, which I think is super important because it's just a 15-minute call where you're getting on the same page, you're outlining what the story is about, and you're telling them what to expect from the interview. But you're also just making sure that they're the right person, that they can answer the questions that you want to answer. But more importantly for us, that that they're going to make good tape for you. You know, it saves you a lot of time on the back end of interviewing people who just like, you come home and it just wasn't the right person.
What are some of the things that you look for specifically that stands out to say this person's going to make a bad tape versus, wow, I think
it's just
we
like
hit gold?
if they're a good storyteller, like are they giving you one-word answers, or are they telling you stories? Are they responding to you in a way that's like engaging? Are they interesting to talk to? I mean, I think it's quite, you can tell from the moment you get on the phone with someone if they're going to give you good tape or not. Yeah. And if they don't, you just don't do the interview, and it saves you a ton of time.
Do you feel like that's kind of hard to back out of, to not do the interview, or how do you do that?
No, you just say you're not. You just say it's not going to go ahead. I think it's fine, and they'll understand. You don't have to be awful about it. You don't have to tell them you're going to give us a horrible tape, so we're not going to interview you. But you can just say, we went in a different direction with the story, or we're not doing the story anymore, or whatever. Yeah.
And Turki, the next question goes to you. When conducting an interview, the space that you're in, I believe, makes a difference. So what sort of things do you do to set the mood in the interview, to prep your client, what's the word? To collect your subject, your interviewee, for a story that's really going to pull out the sorts of answers that you're looking for?
Yes, so Al-Sekka, we started before 1 year. So, okay. We started before 1 year, and the first 2 episodes we recorded in a studio, so professional studio. But then we changed the places. To start the new way of recording. We have already produced 10 episodes now, and in each episode we always meet with a guest we are hosting in the interview 3 times.
Is there something that you do when they come in to make them feel welcome or comfortable or safe to open up?
Yes, I think for me as a journalist, it's very important to understand first the person I'm interviewing, and also to have more maybe untold perspective of his experience and the topics we are talking about. And I would like, or we always care about the place we are recording. So mostly we done interviews in the offices or at home. Or
have you noticed a difference between when you do the interview in an office or a studio versus in someone's living room?
Well, I did in the living room, I did in the hotel room, I did in the office as well. So
do you feel like it's all the same? كل نفس الشيء? Or is there
yes, I think where the guest feel comfortable and he can be more open to answer my questions. Very important for me as a journalist to have this. Yeah.
Is there anything specifically that you do to pull that out of them when you're sitting with them? To
yes,
make them feel comfortable? What maybe like one practical technique for the audience to pull out a strategy to make the person that you're interviewing feel more comfortable to tell that deeper story?
Well, depend. I think for podcast, as I used to work in radio, it's different because you are not also in live. You are recording, so he feels more comfortable because we can talk again, we can record again. So this is very important, and especially for people who have very, critical point of view. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for them to be in live and talk directly about very nervous. I mean, the question that makes them nervous. So it's very important, I think, in my opinion, to have this feeling. To let this person choose the place he want to meet him.
So you let them choose, and then you let them know, hey, if something doesn't go the way that you like, I'm giving you a level of editorial discretion of what is shared and what's not shared.
Well, usually, I'm very strict journalist, so I don't like to give him a space.
So no editorial.
So yeah, I give him the questions that we are focusing on these questions, and you have to be prepared. Maybe if we have any mistakes, within recording, yes, we can record again, but not changing, the answers or the questions.
Great. Ashraf, I want to piggyback off this question. What are some of the things that you do when you hit a wall in that interview where you feel like there's more that is inside of that person that you're looking to pull out? How do you pull that out? And do you have a story where you've maybe pushed too hard?
It's usually, for me, it's like when you mentioned how do you set up the mood for the interview, or when you're talking with your guest. So I always do a little chat before we actually start recording, and basically just make it personal. Explain what the podcast is. Usually, I found it helpful if they know what my background is, and especially for my Heroic Self podcast, because that's more of personal stories for the guest. In terms of the EishBTSWI podcast, and for those of you who don't know Arabic, EishBTSWI means what do you do? So it's basically about a podcast about majors and specialties, and we bring the guest, we talk to them about their experience, and if someone wants to get to that point, what kind of schooling they go through or what kind of training they go to get there. For that, we found it's also helpful for those guests to know what our backgrounds, because we're co-hosting, we're three friends co-hosting that podcast, and it always helps the guest to ease them into the interview. If I get into a trap where the guest isn't talking too much or they're guarded, then I give them that option, because it's a personal story. So I give them that option that let's talk about it. I'll edit the recording. I'll let you listen to it. If you don't like that part, or if you feel that it's very sensitive, then we can take it out.
So you give them an option.
I do give them an option.
Do you have a story where you were in that interview and you're able to finally, like, something that you did, something that you shared, to get them to break past kind of the surface level and really dig deep into an emotional place that not only made it feel like a therapy session, but made those who listened to it feel like, wow, that really touched me as well?
For my Heroic Self podcast, I thought I would get into that kind of issue. Surprisingly, I got into the opposite issue, where people actually talk more than I wanted them to talk.
Oh, so really? That's always a problem in an interview. Not always, but sometimes.
They would do share details that I personally did not think that it would be appropriate.
How do you keep them on track?
I try to cut them nicely and say, well, let's gear towards and try to just fall into a different question. On the other hand, all right. On the other podcast, which we didn't think we had some sort of that issue, but we had a couple of guests where because they were talking about their jobs and what they're doing, they get to a point where they're afraid if what they're saying might not be understood as they want it to be. Right. And if they're afraid that their boss would hear the episode and they wouldn't like it. So I guess I could think of one, we tried our best to get all the answers, and we recorded it twice. We made the person listen to it.
But it just never got there.
Never got. I mean, first of all, I was like, oh yeah, let's do it. Then once we did the edit and everything, we gave it back to the person. They said, no, sorry, I don't feel comfortable.
And that just happens.
It just happens, and we just took that episode out.
Alex, I have a question for you. Yeah, add, please.
Practical tips. Like talking about making people feel comfortable in an interview. I think like one thing that you got to keep in mind is like this is your job and you do it all the time. Whereas for them, this is probably the first time, especially for us, that they're going to be in an interview. So some things that I do is I usually show up like recording and just show up with my mic rolling and like headphones on and stuff, because I feel like that eliminates some of the weirdness of when you start pulling your stuff out of your bag and you're like, I'm going to hit record now, and like that just becomes a weird moment otherwise.
It's a great tip.
And it also gives you some good intro tape if you need it. And then the other thing we do is like I'll sit like this with someone if I can, like on a couch, rather than like across a table, because it feels a little bit like they're at a job interview.
That's another great tip. Those are two great tips. My next question was actually still for you, Alex, which was because you're telling high kind of audio-visual narratives. How do you pull some of those settings where a person's maybe standing at a window? How do you pull those kind of visual narratives out from them when you don't have any visuals, but you're having to do it through audio?
Yeah, I think so I have certain like rules that I'll just never put in. So before we go into the interview, we'll make what's called a flight plan, which is kind of it's not a script, but it's your list of questions, and you need to kind of know why you want to ask those questions and why you want to do it in that order. And the thing that I do is, we'll never ask like or questions. Like I'll never say like, did you feel like this or did you feel like this? Because it's going to give you like a one-word answer. I feel like you have to ask like hyper-specific, like situation-based questions. And so if it's like, instead of asking like how did you feel the day your dog died? You would ask like, can you walk me through the day your dog died, from like when you woke up and like how you found out, and get them to tell you a story. Like you need to get people to talk to you in stories and not ask questions that are going to give them a chance to answer you with a one-word answer. So hyper-specific things that people can visualize, situations, scenes. You need to think in scenes like you're a movie director, and think about people, how you can make them describe scenes. And so that involves a lot of walk me through this day, like, that kind of question, as opposed to...
And you ask leading questions as they share?
Yeah, and like I think those sort of, I'll ask leading questions, and we have a flight plan, but obviously you're supposed to, the flight plan is a guide, and above and beyond everything else, you're supposed to be a real human talking to somebody, rather than, I've sat opposite journalists that I've worked with before who reel off their questions as a list, and it's just the most horrific thing to watch, because they just don't feel like they're present. So I'd say that's the second like thing that I would say. And so
have a plan, but veer from the plan totally. When you see the story developing.
The best moments sometimes are the one where people veer away from that. So yeah, hyper-specific visual questions that people can actually think of something in their mind's eye, as opposed to letting your interviewee get away with giving you these kind of like high-level philosophical questions, because it's just terrible tape. Like it's horrible to listen to. And it needs to be something that's like, I woke up at X time and I left the house and I put my keys in my car and my car wasn't working that day. And then it eventually worked. And then, I don't know, I ran over my dog going out the driveway or something like that. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Right. Moving on to our final question, Turki. You are a journalist, and even as your answer was very different from maybe these two, where you're like, nope, I'm not giving any editorial direction. I have questions that I'm asking, and I want to get the truth. I'm going to ask the hard questions. How do you make a person feel safe enough to give a genuine answer to a hard question, especially as we heard in the horror stories, how sometimes here you can't really give answers to some of the hard questions or opinions that someone might have?
Yes, so for me, it's very important to have a very deep background about the person I'm interviewing. So sometimes I take 1 week to read 3 books about or for this person, to do interview for 40 minutes. So I think it's so my point about this is you have to take the new perspective to interview this person, and the second one is to make this person also feel comfortable that you are understanding also in what he's specialized in. So mainly Al-Sekka is focusing on two main things, which is experience and also critical thoughts about different topics: cinema, culture, society, politics, So for me, I think this is very important. Reading, having very strong background about person you are interviewing, and having also very comfortable Zoom for him to answer you.
You do like a week's research for a 40-minute interview, and you, like Alex was saying, find super honed in laser questions that you're able to be very direct to find that story that you're looking for.
Yeah. I think this is very important, because sometimes when you do like a very daily news interviews, it's sometimes boring because you are just repeating what other media are doing. So in Al-Sekka, we are trying to focus a new perspective, new topics, different angle of these topics, and also new questions that's not being raised before.
So we have 30 seconds left, and so I'm actually going to cut into the Q&A where I'm going to ask the first question. So it's a selfish question, okay? So when I'm conducting an interview, I often, because this is the poll that we took earlier on, right? Everyone's like, "Yep, let's see the boxing match." When I'm conducting an interview, I feel like I have this bond and a rapport, and so I 99% of the time shrink back from asking the conflict question, the one that might bring up disagreements. How have you guys done it successfully to make your shows more engaging and more entertaining?
You just have to ask it. I mean, just
how do
like
you do it in a way that
don't-
doesn't offend?
Well, I mean, look, if you like, you shouldn't be writing questions in your interview plan that are going to offend people, because, like, if you feel like you're going to ask something that's going to offend them, like, there should be a reason for it, and usually there would be if you're asking that kind of question. Don't just, and I would say ask it in as short a time as possible. Just come out with it and ask it. I don't know.
What do you think?
I think it's basically you have to make that connection with your guest, where you have this sort of give a feel that there is a mutual respect between you two, and then when they realize or they feel that you mean no disrespect with your questions, but you genuinely actually want to know what their story is, it helps a lot. And I think that's, and also sometimes explaining why you're asking the question might help.
It's great. Thank you. We're going to open it up for your questions. We got a lot of hands.
Hi. I have a question for Alex. I was just wondering, when you guys do your stories, does gender matter as to, you know, when you go in as a reporter or when you go in as the person asking the questions, does gender matter? Because you have a team where you have female producers and then there's yourself. So do you divide your stories based on that, or is it just how you are as a storyteller?
No, it really does matter, I think, and we definitely have, when we're sort of really lucky to have a team that has, like, I think we're pretty equally split along. No, we're not even. We have way more women than we have. I think there's 2 dudes on the team actually. So we're quite lucky in that we have the resources, like, to, you know, if there are interviews that would just be more comfortable if a woman was doing it, like, of course, like Dana could do it or Tamara could do it. Yeah, for sure, we consider that. But it's not the only thing. You know, also cultural backgrounds. Like, there are stories that I just don't have the understanding to do, but someone like Shahid or someone else on the team would. So we absolutely consider that when we're deciding who's going to do interviews. I think that's super important. Yeah.
Let's get a question from the back. Do we have any questions in the back? Nope, just this corner.
Who do you want to give it to?
My name's Spencer Lodge. I've got a podcast called the Spencer Lodge Podcast. Nice and original name there. I interviewed Tony Robbins recently as well on the podcast, so it was great to get people of a better stature in there. But more importantly, the point you made about interviewing people and asking difficult questions and potentially offending them, I think what everybody needs to realize here is that when you're face-to-face interviewing someone, 70% of what you're saying is not coming out of your mouth. So you have the opportunity with non-verbal communication to build rapport and relationships with people. So when you ask a difficult question, you're asking a lot of it with your non-verbal communication as well. And I think people might forget that they could get a bit intimidated by that they don't need to. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
That's a great point. That is a great point. Another question?
Sorry, Dan.
Hi, so my name is Daniel. I got a podcast called The Drive to Succeed, a podcast. So my main question is, when you're interviewing a person, how long do you usually put time on research, interviewing that person? And second, do you send the questions beforehand, or you just do a pre-talk, like before the interview? I know in some cases you can have like remote interviews as well, but what are your thoughts and experience on that?
So in my experience, I have done some interviews in Ramadan, and people are fasting, and I'm fasting as well. So in this for this interview, I have I spent 1 week reading 3 books just to ask 5 questions for this guest in the program. But I mean, sometimes it's not about it's not about just having someone to have a new episode for the podcast. I think it's very important to know that what you are going to tell people. I mean, through this interview. I mean, you have to design a theme for the interview as well, and you have to read about this person as well. I mean, having a background, what he has said before, and what's the new question you are also focusing on is very important. So sometimes, yes, it takes very long. I mean, reading 3 books just to ask 5 questions.
Yes, and because also I noticed when you send the questions beforehand, it is a little bit more scripted, and like the podcast should be a little bit conversational. So I guess, that's...
We don't send questions beforehand. I think it's just bad journalism practice, to be honest, to do that. In the same way that you don't share tape, you don't share quotes with people after you've interviewed them, but then we're a very journalistically kind of minded podcast, and that this isn't true for talk shows or whatever. But we have a hard and fast rule about not sending questions to people first.
All right, thank you.
One last question. We have one more, and then...
Hey y'all, thank you. Just to build on what Spencer said, I think another thing is when you're making them comfortable, you're able to sometimes just ask out of curiosity, letting them know that you're curious about the point they just made, and asking, can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm just very curious. And wrapping up, sort of figuring out, letting them understand that you've heard them, synthesizing the information that they had, and then just asking them, tell me more about this. I'm very curious to learn more. The question I have, I try and interview future dads, so individuals who are not yet fathers, so before they come to fatherhood. How do you find your audience members? I'm just going to leave it for everyone here. How do you find individuals, especially in the beginning, to interview?
Let me talk about the first part first. So I found out that, especially when we're doing an interview and 3 of us interviewing one person, and if we're doing it face to face, it's different than when you're doing it online. And I've done a lot of interviews online too. When you're doing it face to face, you have that advantage, and it might be a disadvantage too, that you actually have all the other parts of not just what you're saying, but also your body language, your eye contact. When you're a group, you need at least one person that has a good eye contact, body language with the guest. Because if all of you start giving signs to each other, oh, let's cut the interview, or let's change the question, the guest feels uncomfortable, and then they start zoning off, or they start not answering your question. It's just disrespectful. So you need at least one person that have direct contact with the guest. In an online type of interview, you just gotta make sure that you follow up with your guest with either summarizing, even actually when you're doing a live interview, summarizing what the guests have said to highlight the important parts actually helps a lot and makes them comfortable that you're actually listening to them and not just hearing what they're saying.
That is all that we have time for this panel. So let's give it up for our panelists.